Hi, I'm Lisandro Resto. Welcome to the A-List. My guest for this edition is Jeanne Sparrow. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So you host You and Me this morning, or excuse me, sorry, we have to start over.
No, we don't.
Do we?
Mm-mm.
No? Okay. You and Me you admitted this morning.
Yeah,
Right.
this morning
You
is
and
no
Me-
longer. It's
right.
just you and me.
Right. On WCIU-The with Melissa Foreman, and you used to host it alone.
Mm-hmm.
So how did that start with Melissa co-hosting with you?
We're going back a few years. The show started off as actual cut-ins between the programming that was already on in the morning. So it wasn't really a full show. So I hosted that alone. And then Melissa ended up joining the show because she filled in for me when I had to take a medical leave. And then we became partners when the show went to half hours when I came back.
So then she spoke about a lunch that you two had because she had to fill in with you. You had a lunch.
Yeah.
And when you had the, like in between segments, did you see You and Me going in the direction that it was?
I'd rather talk about the lunch because we had the best cauliflower soup.
Okay.
And that's when we, kind of realized that we were kind of on the same page.
Yeah.
But I don't know that you can know where a show is going, especially when it's not a show you created yourself. So I'd have to say no, but I think you can tell what direction it's going to end up going, all other things being equal or other things being left alone and being allowed to develop in a certain way. You can tell what your chemistry is going to be. You can tell what kind of things you'll be interested in. Now, whether the management that created the show and the producers who execute it have the same vision is anybody's guess. You can't really predict what people are going to do. Right.
Now, you're a voiceover artist, and you can be heard on television and radio commercials, websites, CD-ROMs. I read this all on the WCIU page. Tell us a little bit about what it means to be a voiceover artist, and what have you done?
It's more acting than it is just talking, because you often have to inhabit a character, even if the character isn't really defined. Like, even if it's not a full story, even though that 30 seconds or minute or whatever it is, you're playing a type. Perhaps a mom who, buys Tide, or a sister who's helping, bake a cake with, I don't know, Duncan Hines or something.
Yeah.
So that's what I've often done. Now, there is some announcer work in that. I don't do it as much as I used to. It's hard with the schedule I have now. I used to have a little more time to do that because it happens during business hours. It's very kind of organized and regular. It's an unusual way to make a living. There were a few years that's all I did. And it's enjoyable, it's fun, and I think when you use your voice for a living, sometimes you fall into that, and when you've acted and that sort of thing, you do it. It's fun.
So is any of it still circulating?
You know what, some of the websites I've done may still be running. I don't have anything current because I haven't been auditioning lately, and I haven't been recording anything lately. I've done a lot of documentaries and what they call industrial videos, which are for companies that use their stuff internally, like it's not going to be broadcast. So that's what it falls under, that particular category. It's not necessarily an industrial video or anything like that. So I've done some things for charity or for charitable arms of big corporations that they may still be using, but I would have no way of knowing that.
Right. So you actually started out in Louisiana, and your speech and debate coach sent you to an audition as an announcer on a radio station, right?
Yep.
And so if it weren't for your speech and debate coach, do you think you would ever get into radio?
Probably not.
Probably not.
Probably not. I don't know that you can think of this as a career because it's fun. You know, in fact, I didn't even think of it as a career, even after having done it and making money at it when I was in high school. You know, it's, you know, because she sent me for the audition because her friend was the programmer at the station, and he liked to hire young people so that if they stayed in the area and they worked their way through college, they would stay there. And so it's easy for part-time work, you know,
Right.
and it's flexible and it gives you experience if that's what you end up wanting to do. I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. You know, or then later I wanted to be a therapist, and then later I wanted to be, you know what I'm saying? So it's like all these different things that I went through. And when I decided I didn't want to go to graduate school right out of undergrad, I needed something to do. And this was the only thing I'd been doing because when I went to Northwestern, I was working at the college radio station. And so the guy in the career placement office said, "You ever think about doing radio since you've been doing it all this time?" And I honestly was like, no. I was like, people do this for a living?
Yeah.
And I got an internship at WGN Radio, and I realized people could have a career doing it, and you could have a life doing it, and not actually work for a living. And let me tell you something, that's pretty tempting.
Right.
And so off I went. But had she not sent me, had I not had that exposure and understood what it was, like I always liked radio, I always liked music, but I didn't think it was a viable career option.
So when did it become a viable career option to you?
I'm still trying to figure that out.
You're still trying to figure, okay.
Yes, because one thing leads to the next, and when it stops leading to the next thing, then that's when it's over. But I don't know if you always realize that something is a career until you're well into it. I think some people do. I don't know that it worked that way for me. I think I realized that I was accomplishing things and doing things I enjoyed and discarding the things that I didn't and saying, I don't want to go back down that road again, and just pursuing the things that I found interesting. So at what point did I realize it was an actual career? I couldn't tell you. Right. Maybe in my 30s, maybe after I had been doing it about 10 years, I'm like, oh, okay, I guess I'm going to keep doing this.
Yeah. So moving back to when you were in Louisiana, you got accepted into Northwestern. How did your parents react to the move that you had to make?
My dad was not happy about it, but it was okay because we have family here. My mom was actually really proud because my mom went to Northwestern. So she was, I think, happy that I chose her alma mater. And then it dawned on her how far I would be away from home, but I don't think it surprised her. My grandmother either. She was dismayed a little bit, but was not particularly surprised. I don't even know if I realized what it would mean to move that far away from home. I figured it out, and you know, we all did. So
it was difficult when you moved
difficult?
to Chicago?
No, I wouldn't call it difficult. It was just different. You know, I didn't know what winter was. I thought I did because, you know, when you're 17, you think you know everything, and trust me, you don't.
Right.
But I remember I had my coat, and my aunt who lived up here saw it, and like for Thanksgiving, and it was one of these years that it was really nice and kind of warm and things, and she looked and she called my mother. She was like, "Ethel, you need to get this child a real coat." And my mom didn't even know what it was. She was like, "What's a real coat?" And so, you know, and these are the days before the internet where my aunt could just email her a picture. And so she said, "Let me tell you something. Go on the Sears catalog and look for this."
For a real coat, yeah.
And she told her what to get, and my mom got me like this huge down. I mean, it literally looked like a comforter for Christmas. And I came back, and it really came in handy because it didn't get cold until like January, so winter quarter at Northwestern, and walking down Sheridan Road in the middle of, right by Lake Michigan, in the middle of the winter. I had no idea it could get that cold, except like at the Arctic or Antarctica. I had no clue.
So that was the difficult part, the cold?
I think that was probably the most difficult part, to be honest. And culturally speaking, Southwest Louisiana and South Louisiana, where New Orleans and, you know, Cajun country is, Acadiana is what we call it, is very different culturally than the rest of the country. There's a huge French influence, and it took me a minute to understand, you know, fully, but I also wasn't aware of what I didn't know. I just knew that things were different, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Now looking back on it, I know what it was, but then I just figured it out the best way I could, you know, and the good thing about college is that you're all together, even when you go away to school, when everybody else is there away from home too, then you're all
understand.
in the same situation. And so you kind of make bonds. There are women and men that I'm friends with to this day, and my 25th reunion was just this past fall. So these are people I've known since I was 17 years old, and some of them are still my dearest friends because we were all kind of in it together. I think it would have been much more difficult had I moved and not been in that situation.
Right. And I was surprised to figure this out. When you went to college, you were studying something else completely other than radio.
Oh God, yes.
Yeah. And you were doing it on the side.
Because I didn't think that radio was a career. I just followed my interests because that's what I was, going toward. Now, I did originally enter Northwestern as a communications student, kind of undecided, because I thought, all right, in general, I want to be a communicator of some sort, and that could be a good background to get a law degree. Still wasn't thinking about broadcast as an actual career, but one of the professors that I wanted to study with had a heart attack the summer before I went into my classes, and I was taking like two of his, or I was, had thought that I was going to be taking two of his classes. I hadn't actually registered yet, and he took a sabbatical, and then he left the university, like he, retired or something. And he was the person that I had like talked to. Sometimes when you're, I don't want to say being recruited, but when you're talking to schools and choosing them, you choose them based on certain interactions you have. And there have been a couple of students and this one professor who I really kind of bonded with, and I was so disappointed when he wasn't going to be teaching that I was like, well, do I really want to do communications? Because I was going to be a communications major of some sort with a psychology minor.
Right. And
so then I just switched it. Even though in the College of Arts and Sciences at that time, there were no minors, but I figured I would just take classes in comm and figure out my life. I don't know. I did not know what I was doing.
Right.
But it all kind of worked out.
Yeah, it did. And then you were interning at WGCI and WGN, and you met Steve Harvey. You worked with Steve Harvey?
So no, I was an intern at WGN Radio, and that's when I was still in college. Then I ended up working there. Later in my career, when I worked at WGCI, I worked with Steve Harvey. I was a co-host of his first radio show, which aired here locally in the mid-90s.
So you still had a lot of success with something that wasn't in your direction.
I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know that you would say that it wasn't my direction, because if it was where I was supposed to be going, then that's the direction I was going in.
Right.
I never looked at it as I'm not supposed to be here. I just kind of, like I said, followed my path.
And a few years into your radio career, you started to appear on television.
Yes.
Tell us about that transition.
Around the same time, I'm trying to remember how it all happened, because it was around the same time I was working with Steve, maybe right before or right after I was working with Steve. I think I met a producer or a programmer who was a friend of mine. So one guy I had worked with when I was doing traffic. Through a party, I went to his house, and then I met one of his friends who worked at Channel 50, and he recognized me from the billboards or something we had done. He was like, "Yeah, have you ever thought about doing TV?" And we had done some things, with the station. I want to say, did I do Bud Billiken? Did I report? I think I was a reporter for Bud Billiken Parade on the South Side.
Yeah.
But it was just because we had a relationship as part of the radio station, and I had been out there all the time. And he was like, "Yeah, I saw you on that broadcast. Did you ever want to do it for a living?" And I was like, "I don't know, but I'll try it." And he had a program for Black History Month that he wanted to have a Black female host for, and he just hadn't found the person he wanted for it yet. And so he tried me out. And we ended up having kind of a long working relationship there. And again, one thing leads to the next, and it all just kind of falls into place sometimes.
And was that for the Shadow Broadcast Services for 3 years that you served? That was the different
Shadow was traffic.
Okay,
was
that was
when
traffic.
I did traffic. So yeah, it all kind of overlaps. If you're trying to make sense of it chronologically, it's just not. It's just not going to happen. I want to say the Shadow stuff happened right after GN Radio. I think I was working there. I think they overlapped.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you served WGN-TV for 4 years. That was 1996 to 2000.
That was when I did the Bud Billiken stuff.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
So and Bud Billiken at that time was broadcast on GN-TV. I also did traffic for GN-TV when their morning show first started back in the early 90s. And I was right out of college then, but I don't know that I appeared. Did I appear on camera for that? I can't remember. It's hard. It all kind of melts together.
Yeah, it melts together, yeah. That's what it seems like when I was reading through it. It just kind of, yeah.
It does. Well, you know what? Here's the thing. In our business, I think that there are a lot of different jobs that aren't really full-time jobs. There are a lot of jobs that are just little pieces of jobs. And you do your best to make a living and put things together that make sense to you. And sometimes you take jobs to get experience doing certain things. Because I remember the reason why I went to work at Shadow Traffic when I was right out of, maybe 6 months to a year out of college, and I had been working at WGN Radio as a copywriter, but I had a mentor, a man named John Guerin, who is a well-known radio programmer, and I had met him through one of our other bosses at Tribune, who knew him very well, and he was right across the street. And so I went to him for advice. I would give him my little cassette tapes. We used to we used to record our shows on cassette tapes. I don't even know if you know what that is. But I would send it to him, and he would listen. He would give me critiques and give me suggestions. And one of his suggestions was, you're very rehearsed, like you're good, but you need to get better at being off the cuff. This is Chicago. You have to be able to have a conversation on the air and have it seem real. And if you want to continue in the type of radio I think you'll be good at, you need to go over there. I think this is one avenue that you can figure that out because you're always playing kind of second fiddle to other people and you interact with them. They don't always just toss to you. You end up being a part of a show.
Right.
So it's a good way to get experience. But saying all that to say, as you get experience and as opportunities present themselves, if you're smart, you say yes. And so everything gets kind of messy, and they all build all these little blocks on top of each other, and you have this wide base of knowledge at a very basic level that you can build and find your specialty and find out where it is that you actually fit in this business and what those experiences give you to get to wherever this top of the pyramid is supposed to be for you.
And you were working on several things at one time.
Always.
And was there ever a point where it was the most difficult, or was there an easy period? Is there an easy period now? Is it still the same?
I think as you focus, it gets easier because you're focusing on one thing, but then other challenges come up. It's easy in one way, and it's difficult in another. Shifting gears has always been pretty easy for me. So I liked having a lot of different things to do. I think the only difficult thing was, when you're working different hours and trying to figure out your transportation when you don't have a car, or working 7 days a week and not really getting a break.
Right.
Or not getting holidays because you're part-time at like all these different places, or you have one full-time job but you only got a week of vacation and you want to get home but you can't really afford. There's a lot of trips I missed out on because in this business when you first start you work a lot of holidays. So there's a lot of times when my friends who had like regular corporate jobs were going out of town for Memorial Day weekend because even though they didn't have a lot of vacation time, they got their holidays. I worked a lot of holidays, and while I got paid for that, I missed out on some of that stuff. But
Yeah.
I had good times otherwise, and I didn't have to work every day.
And the whole time you were doing voice for Naked Voices. That's from like 1994.
No, that's my voiceover agent. So voiceover stuff started somewhere in the middle of that. Yeah.
Okay, and so that's the Naked Voices is the agent. And
it was several different names and different agents that moved to different places, but I've had pretty much the same representation for voiceover work since the mid-90s, yeah.
And you were in in-flight programming. What was that like for United?
For United Airlines, yeah. I was the host. Okay, so you know how the shows come up on the thing, and nowadays they have the actors from the different shows introducing their shows and things like that. There were a couple of years, maybe a year and a half, that they decided to have just regular people hosts. And I was one of those hosts. And so we just had a shoot once a month that was several days. And so I took off from all the other jobs I had and I went, and shot for this. And they would be like 12-hour days and pretty long and stuff. It was an interesting experience because it was not one that I'd had before. And while I loved the people that I work with, and many of them I'm still in touch with, it wasn't my kind of work. You know, it was very exacting because it had to be a certain amount of time and it had to be a certain, you know, they're very particular and calculated about how they word certain things and what you're, you know, what you're tossing to, because the audience is very different and you're also in a very regulated space. You know, you think about the FAA's rules and things like that. And so I don't know all of what went into the scripting of it, but I do know we had to stick to scripting pretty rigidly, which, you know, I can do, but why?
Right.
So,
yeah.
But it was fun. I learned a lot from it. And again, it's sometimes it all comes down to just the relationships. You know, I still see some of those same guys and girls, women and men that I worked with then and on different projects, because when you freelance, you know, everybody ends up in the same pool of people. So you see the same production people, you see the same, you know, producers, you see the same talent and things. You go to the same auditions. So it's a community. You work together, you're colleagues, but you just don't see each other every day.
Right. And is You and Me more free than that? Are they structured and calculated?
Yes and no. Television shows, I think, are calculated in that there is an audience you're trying to appeal to. There are things that you want to accomplish. How you get there can be a little more open for debate. Things are scripted, but when you have an interview just like this, it ends up being a conversation. So sometimes it'll take a left turn, and it's okay because it's live TV. What are they going to do, stop me?
Right, and that's why it was in my favorite morning show, because it was so authentic.
We're a little unhinged.
Yeah, yeah. And there's been a running joke with you and Gilbert Gottfried.
Oh gosh,
with
we have to talk about that one.
Well, I wanted to ask what have been some of your most interesting and notable guests on the show for you and me?
Wow, interesting. You know what, Gilbert's actually a very nice man, and I don't know that whole joke stream is good for your audience though. But I'm trying to think. You know what? I think the most interesting guests end up being not necessarily the stars, who are interesting. Don't get me wrong. Marlon Wayans, we've had almost every one of the Wayans brothers on. Marlon, Sean, Damon. You know, we haven't had Keenan on, but they're all funny. The comedians, Joe Coy and George Wallace, and all these people that come on, they're great and they're funny, and actors are interesting, but it's the real people who are trying to do, you know, just everyday people. Not that the comedians aren't real people and the actors aren't real people, because they are. But when you talk about people who live their lives every day trying to do something different, like the kids who are, you know, who for their public service project for school came up with some amazing idea and are now being honored somewhere. Those are the people that are really interesting, because they inspire you, because you can look at a celebrity and say, oh man, I wish I could do that. But there's a bit of a distance, because even though they're just like you and you can do that, it seems less attainable. Whereas when you meet somebody who could live down the street from you and walks on the same streets you do every day, and takes the bus or goes to this, you know, same grocery store or something, does something extraordinary, you go, okay, well, I need to get on my game now, you know, and I think that's the effect it has on an audience as well.
Yeah. And you also have a segment every day to feature a rescue dog, which I found pretty admirable. How did that start? And you do this for Young at Heart, an
We did this month.
Right.
This month, every month we change organizations that we work with. The reason why for November we've been working with Young at Heart, their senior pet rescue, and November is encouraging people to adopt pets who are seniors, who've maybe been abandoned, or you know, maybe their owner died or something like that. The station, I think, has always been involved, even before You and Me started, in rescue organizations and partnering and featuring pets and that sort of thing. The rescue dog happened, I don't know, I don't remember exactly. I think it was one of those organic things that happened where you're like, okay, we're going to feature a rescue dog. And then I think one day somebody said, it might have been Melissa, said, we should have one of those dogs in live. Wouldn't that be the best thing ever?
And hard.
And
Yeah,
so
very hard.
every Monday we have the dog come into the studio, and it is on a Monday, especially if it's like a crappy day where it's snowing or it's raining or something. You have this dog and you're just cuddling with the dog on the couch, or you're chasing it around the studio or picking up his poop or whatever happened because accidents happen. It's fun, it's distracting, and who doesn't love? I mean, even if you don't like animals, watching dogs are interesting. You know, they upstage you, but who cares?
Right. And so what has been the most, like, since animals are so hard to work with, what has been the most disastrous situation?
You know what? I don't even think of it as disastrous, because if it's
funny.
disastrous, it's funny.
Yeah.
We did have one time we were sitting, okay, so the way our set is set up, there's like a couch in the back. And sometimes we're at that, and sometimes we're sitting at a news desk in the front, but you still see the couch in the background. One time, one of the pets walked past. I think it was a he, just, you know, completely, you know, trying to figure out, you know, sniff everybody's address out. And the leg goes up during the story right on to like somebody's plant. Like, I think we had a bunch of flowers in from some company for a spring or something like that. And that whole tree got faded. Just faded. And it was so funny because you could see it happening and there was nothing you could do about it. We're talking about the story, and there's this monitor there, and I'm like, wait a minute, something's about to happen.
And that happened live?
That happened live, Okay. Trying to think with pets, funnier things that have happened. I'm sure something has, and I just don't remember. But that's the one that sticks out in my mind now because, I mean, it's just a dog being a dog, you know?
Yeah. And so every morning, 6 to 8, you're on weekdays.
Yes.
Melissa Foreman last time she was on the show, she mentioned how she liked the schedule because at 10 o'clock she thought she could leave and just have the rest of the day to herself. What do you think about the schedule? Do you find it?
That part is an advantage.
Freeing?
I wouldn't call it freeing because you still do have to wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and that's very difficult for me because I'm not a morning person. So there are challenges to it and there are advantages to it. But, you know, if somebody's paying you get up and do, you know, what you do and just talk and have fun with your friend, it's not the worst way to make a living. Right.
And so for the rest of the day, what do you have?
Well, we have a lot of meetings. Meeting. So we do a lot of meetings, and sometimes we have appearances and speaking engagements and things like that. I do try to do those during the week, during the day, because it's when I'm most alert. Like, evenings are the worst. You know, because even if you get a nap, you're still dragging the next day. You try to do it and support, like, and everybody's different. Like, some people can take a nap and function until 9, 10 o'clock at night, just get 4 hours of sleep, and they're back at it the next day. I, unfortunately, am not one of those people. So, you know, it's walk the dog, go get groceries, clean up, just like everybody else, you know, cook dinner, try to have a life, you know, try to meet people for lunch and things like that. And when I was in grad school, it was kind of rough. But my grad school, the classes were on Saturdays, like it was an all-day Saturday program. So at least I didn't have to go to night school. You know, because I think that would have been tough. I think it would have been taken me a long time to finish had I done that. But, yeah.
So final question for any student that's going into broadcasting or radio, what kind of advice would you give them? Oh,
boy, that's hard because you know what? The business is so different for you guys entering it than it was when I did. So, but it's always going to be some kind of difficult because there's always so many people that want to do it. But there's only so many people that can do it. And by can, I mean not just the talent, because there's a lot of talented people, just like singers. There's all these talented singers that don't or can't or won't go through what it takes to do, you know, things on a bigger stage. So they find other things to satisfy their desire to do that or to express their talent. I think the same thing is true for broadcast. There's only so many jobs. They're not making any more of them. You know, there's only so many time slots. Granted, the internet has expanded some coverage and even cut into what broadcast looks like now. And who's to say what it's going to look like in the future? Because I've seen so many changes going from analog to digital in my career alone that I can only imagine what you're going to see. So the only advice I have that I think still applies, practically speaking, is on a more spiritual level. And that is, if you want to tell stories and you want to tell them to a lot of people, then you have to be determined. You have to study your craft, because even if you're talented, you still have to get better at what you do and understand the business of what you do. So it's not just working on you, it's working on what everything is and how that's changing and where you fit into it, and understanding what you do best. And I think that's a journey that you have to commit to, whether it's by accident or on purpose. For me, like I said, my path unfolded. I don't know how that happens now. I'm sure it could, because if it's meant to be, it will be. But I do think it's a lot of hard work, and it's often inconvenient. So you really have to want to do it.
All right. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
I'm Lisandro Resto. Thank you for watching The A-List with Jeanne Sparrow.